As soon as I start telling people what I'm about to tell you, my friends and acquaintances immediately get that look. You know the one, like, uh-oh, he's gone off the deep end. Some even suggest very gently that I might want to talk to a psychiatrist. Totally fair, because today we're talking about God, about collective consciousness. And yes, I'm putting an equal sign between the two. It's going to be an epic one, trust me. I believe the only thing science should be studying, like drop everything else and focus on one thing, is the question of consciousness. That's the frontier. That's the real final frontier. Like, forget Mars, we haven't even mapped the insides of our own heads, because consciousness is primary, not a byproduct, but a fundamental property of the universe itself. Now, in the classical worldview, we've been told that the matter comes first, that consciousness is just a side effect, an emergent property of a highly complex system like the human brain. In this view, we're just meat computers. Neurons fire, circuits connect, and poof, consciousness. That's the mainstream narrative. But here's the issue. It doesn't actually explain anything. It leaves us with a giant, glaring mystery that philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. What is the hard problem? It's this. How do physical processes inside a lump of flesh, your brain, create subjective experience? How does matter suddenly starts feeling things? How does electricity in the brain become the taste of strawberries, the color blue, the feeling of a heartbreak? Unbelievable. Spoiler, no one knows. And that's why two major hypotheses exist to try to make sense of it. The first one is emergentism. Consciousness emerges from complex matter. Basically, you're a very advanced potato and somehow self-aware. And the second one is panpsychism. Consciousness is not the result of matter, it's the source. Matter arises from consciousness, and consciousness is baked into the fabric of reality. I came across a book by Federico Fagin called Irreducible. If you're not familiar with the name, he's the inventor of the silicon gate transistor, the key innovation that made microprocessors possible. In other words, the tech wizard behind the chip that powers the very device you're using to watch this video. So first off, thank you, Mr. Fagin. So, he's a scientist. Okay, smart. But here's the twist. In the early 1990s, after decades of building the foundation of modern computing, Federico had a spiritual awakening, a literal one. He shifted from asking how to compute to what is consciousness. A scientist through and through, he began diving deep into the mystery of awareness and ended up writing a book proposing quantum informational panpsychism. In two words, his book explains that physical reality is secondary, consciousness is primary. Consciousness is in quantum superposition, and the physical particles are nothing but a free will of those quantum fields. But the problem with that book is that it had no experiments, no equations, just a radical new hypothesis from one of the smartest engineers alive. And then today I've discovered the scientific paper that changes the game. So I'm super excited to share this with you guys. In 2023, a team led by Shan at the Institute of Electronics in Beijing published a peer-reviewed scientific paper. This time, there was an experiment. And the results? Let's just say they made quite a ripple. An experiment was conducted. A detector was set up. This detector could not determine the quantum state, but as soon as an observer with consciousness, meaning a human being, appeared behind the detector, it was able to determine the quantum state. Uh-oh. In other words, a device without consciousness and a device with consciousness affected the quantum state differently. Proofs, evidences. And what does this mean? Well, it means that we now have the first scientific evidence that quantum panpsychism is not just a hypothesis. It's already a theory that explains a great deal, an enormous amount actually. And most importantly, it explains, it does not contradict the spiritual experience I had in August 2024. Because in that August, I had a full-blown spiritual awakening. I'm talking goosebumps, tears, divine presence, the whole cosmic buffet. Call it God, call it the Force. Yes, the actual Force from Star Wars, whatever you name it. I felt it firsthand. And through that raw, undeniable experience, I glimpsed the nature of consciousness, the meaning of life, and to my absolute shock, I became spiritual, which is wild. Consider who I used to be. Until the age of 37, I was the furthest thing from spiritual. I rolled my eyes at God talk. I dismissed anything that didn't come with a peer-reviewed formula or a graph. If it couldn't be explained in logic or math, I filed it under the woo-woo nonsense. But then it happened, and everything I thought I knew came crashing down. My worldview completely obliterated. And so, armed with a brain trained in science and soul suddenly on fire, I did what any good nerd would do. I started researching. I devoured books, pored over scientific papers, and dug through everything I could find to figure out what the hell just happened to me and how it actually works. In my research, I leaned heavily on one thing: first-hand experience. I scrutinized every source, every book, every theory through the lens of what I actually lived through. If it didn't match my direct experience, it didn't make the cut. And what I experienced, witnessed by others, was this: every living being is constantly transmitting his experience into a shared field, a kind of real-time collective intelligence. You can call it source, the Akashic records, or just weird sci-fi stuff, but to me, it's God. Some people, it turns out, can tune into that field. They can read it, not with their eyes, but with something deeper. And as insane as it sounds, I now know it's real, it's happening, and it's quantum. These are the collective quantum fields, and they're more alive than any of us ever imagined. Only this could explain what happened to me. And even then, it's just the tip of the iceberg. None of it involved psychedelics, breath work, or any kind of spiritual prep kit. I wasn't sitting in lotus pose on the top of the mountain. I was sober, completely. Let me remind you, I wasn't spiritual at all. Meditation, waste of time. Breath work, please. What are we hyperventilating ourselves into wisdom now, right? That was me. I didn't believe anything beyond atoms and equations. I didn't believe in God. And then I experienced Him, which means I don't have to believe anymore. I know, I felt it. I communicated, not with a man in the clouds with a beard, but with a vast, timeless, genderless collective intelligence. A presence that was everywhere and everything. God isn't a being. God is being. If that makes sense, God is consciousness itself. We're not in a universe, we're in a multiverse, one of an infinite number, all being born and dying right now. And it's all part of the process, a living, breathing, conscious process. God is a process, the process of evolution by self-observation. Self-observation leads to self-knowledge, and that's how God experienced itself. And yes, all of this happened when I was stone cold sober. In fact, it happened after I quit even the weed, my last remaining crutch. No alcohol, no psychedelics, no ayahuasca retreats in the jungle, no meditations, zero yoga, just me, sober, and then, bam. Now, if it had been drugs, easy. My brain, my ego would have shown up the next morning with a hot cup of relax that was just a trip. But it didn't have a chance this time, because this time it was not a trip. And at first I thought I was going insane, because for someone with a science background, talking about collective minds, divine intelligence, and a multiversal awareness, yeah, it's basically a one-way ticket to the psych ward, which, by the way, I visited 3 times. Strapped down to the bed, sedated, the whole 9 yards. So if you're still with me and haven't clicked away out of concern for my mental health, first of all, thank you. And second, please subscribe, because this channel is just getting started. So I experienced the God's presence, communicated with it, and almost went insane, except this time I didn't let paranoia win. I didn't spiral into fear about losing my mind. Instead, I chose curiosity. Curiosity over fear, curiosity over doubt. And that simple choice changed everything. For several months, I lived in a kind of wonderland. Synchronicities, glitches in matrix, unexplainable events. Everyday life started to feel like a spiritual scavenger hunt, full of signs, meanings, and actual magic. Not metaphorical magic, like real magic. I even wrote a book about all of it. Full details, front-to-back miracles, zero-numbered list and newly invented terms. Links in the description if you want to dive into the rabbit hole with me. And when the whirlwind slowed down just enough for me to catch my breath, I started to read. I started to research, cross-checked my experience with anything I could possibly find in science, philosophy, metaphysics, you name it. And then it happened. I found something real, something that explained everything I had gone through, without dismissing it or chalking it up to hallucination or spiritual fluff. A scientific hypothesis that doesn't just align with my experience, it confirms it. It's called quantum informational panpsychism. Yes, I know, mouthful, but here's the gist. God is not some old man with a beard. God is eternal, infinite, collective consciousness. That consciousness manifests into physical form through quantum fields. It exists in a state of pure potential or quantum superposition, and each time a wave collapses, each time a decision is made, a particle appears, and that's the act of free will. Your will, God's will, same thing. Every particle, every moment, every thought, it's a part of that. That's what Federico Fagin, the guy who literally invented the microchip, proposed. And recently I came across a scientific paper from a Chinese lab that supports his hypothesis, an actual experiment with data. And that moment was my scientific eureka, not just a spiritual awakening, a rational one as well. Now, I want to share that worldview because for the first time ever, I don't just feel it's true, I can show you why it is. The evidence I found comes from Shan and his research group at the Chinese Institute of Electronics. Serious scientists, experts in electromagnetic fields and waves. This isn't some fringe blog post. They published peer-reviewed work. They approached the question not from dogma, not from belief, but from a pure scientific angle. And they understood more than most. But let's not drift off course here, because once I found part of the answer, I immediately have even more questions. Like the most important one of all, if God exists, if this infinite intelligence really divided itself into an uncountable numbers of universes, all evolving, being born, dying, learning, sending experience back into the source, then why? If God is already everything, why bother? Why create all of this? And the answer hit me like a thunder on a clear day. Because God is not a thing. God is a process of eternal evolution, a self-aware unfolding of being. To evolve means to know yourself, to feel yourself, to experience yourself, not theoretically, but viscerally. And for that, God had to fragment himself, not just once, but constantly. In every moment, God divides himself into infinite pieces, into you and me, into every blade of grass, every star system, every universe within the multiverse. Why? To feel, to learn, to grow, to become, by watching, touching, stumbling, crying, laughing. Every single fragment, every consciousness is a pixel in the God's ever-updating screen of self-awareness. So yes, your spiritual awakening isn't just about you. It's God remembering himself through you. And if that sounds insane, good. You're still thinking like an engineer, just like I did. Don't believe me blindly, please don't. Start with Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, and then go and read Federico Fagin's book for a more scientific language. Then read the scientific paper by Shan's team for some experiments and equations. I'll leave all the links below. And if you want a more personal take on how all this came crashing into my life, I'll link to my book as well. Spoiler, it's weird, it's raw, and it's all true. Your eyes cannot see themselves unless they look in the mirror. And if you are everything, including that mirror, well, then you must divide yourself to see yourself. And then divide yet even more because you're infinite. Because if you're infinite being, well, you're infinite, meaning that no matter how many times you divide, you're still infinitely larger than that subset. So you have to do it all over again every single moment. Never-ending cycle of creation. God is an eternal process, a process of self-discovery, self-expansion, and self-expression. God is not a being. God is becoming, like a wheel that keeps turning, like a spiral moving upward. But from the above, it looks like a circle. Samsara, the cycle, the unfolding infinity, from within itself, forever and ever. That's what God is. And the moment I understood that, something deep clicked into place. That's why you and I exist. That's why the universe exists. That's why consciousness exists, because it's the thing. Consciousness is not the outcome. It's the universe. It's the origin. Consciousness isn't the side effect of biology. It's the code, the matrix, the canvas and a paint and a brush. And that's why science, sooner or later, will stop pretending consciousness is some fringe problem and realize this is the main thing. We'll stop building tools that look outward and start building tools that look in. We already have quantum computers. We already know there are mysteries our current models can't explain. And one day, very soon, scientists will ask not just how does it work, but why it works. And they will end up where I did, at the doorstep of consciousness, at the feet of the mystery. And that day, humanity will take its next evolutionary leap. That's when the world starts to look like Imagine by John Lennon. Not just lyrics, but a roadmap. That's when we'll finally see God is not an old man in the sky. God is not a statue or a story of a man with a penis who turned water into wine. God is a process, a spiral, a song, a field of quantum becoming. And you are a note in that song. But most importantly, you are the space between the notes where the music lies. And the best part, you get to sing back. If this message from a homeless philosopher resonated, please subscribe to the channel. It's only going to get more interesting from here, because this is the sign. I'm Max, your spiritual homeless Indiana Jones. Peace.